going on, everyone? Welcome into the Brant Partial Show. So let's talk Florida State football. So Florida State, if you look on paper, is some of their high-end key playmakers on offense and defense, whether it's Jared Verse at edge rusher, Jaheim Bell, who they got in the transfer portal, Keon Coleman, a wide receiver they got in the transfer portal, or running back Trey Benson, who they landed in the transfer portal last year. They have some true difference makers on the offensive side of the ball. Forgot to mention Johnny Wilson at wide receiver. So there's key difference makers on the offensive side of the ball for the Florida State Seminoles. The main question for Florida State is, are there enough difference makers on the defense besides Jared Verse for them to win a national championship? My answer to that as of right now would be no. But I'll say this. Florida State is going to be much-watched TV this year. This is going to be an exciting football team to watch. I'm really looking forward to see how they do this year. I think Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, I think that's a really dynamic threat at wide receiver. I think that at running back, Trey Benson makes a case for the best running back in the country, and I think there's going to be more and more people that are going to proclaim him as the number one running back for the 2024 NFL Draft. So, yeah, Florida State, they offensively, they have cleared up a lot of question marks via the portal. I mean, I guess there wasn't necessarily a lot of question marks to begin with. Like, say they didn't land Keon Coleman or Jaheim Bell, you would have. You would say they probably had enough playmakers just with like Benson, Johnny Wilson, and Jordan Travis to win a conference title. But now they've really shored that up, and they have added some depth at wide receiver and tight end, and not just depth, but high-end players in Keon Coleman and Jaheim Bell. So, yeah, Florida State's going to be super fun. They're going to be tested in week 1 against LSU. I talk LSU football a lot on my Bayou Bengals football channel. If you haven't watched that, make sure to check that out. But yeah, that'll be a fun matchup week 1. It'll tell a lot about Florida State. Florida State made a statement last year. I know they lost 3 games, but this is a very competitive football team. Had a little bit of a different feel to Florida State this year. Like it felt like Florida State was legitimately back, like they were a threat to win. They were actually a legitimate threat in the ACC. I know they didn't win the ACC, but it felt like they were turning the corner. Mike Norvell is a good football coach. I think the question is can he become an elite football coach and win big at Florida State is the big question. But he is, taking the right steps in the right direction. Florida State's recruiting isn't as high a level as I thought, but Mike Norvell, he has done what he has needed to do in the transfer portal. So what they haven't done in recruiting, they've made up for it in the transfer portal. But yeah, Florida State, Jared Verse, there's not a lot to say about Jared Verse except that he, we'll simply put, saying that he is going to be a top 5 pick, probably the number 1 edge rusher in the 2024 draft. That puts it, mostly in perspective of what kind of talent this guy has. So yeah, Jared Verse, excellent edge rusher. This is a guy that's good against the run. Quickness, got some legitimate power. Is the guy that really draws a lot of attention from the offensive side of the ball. So, yeah, Florida State, Jared Verse is dynamic. Mike Norvell proven he's a good coach. Can he become elite coach? Can he win? Can he lead Florida State to an ACC title? Can he get them to the playoff and a national title? It's a schedule that's going to be tough. You're going to find out through the first 4 games. You're going to find out a lot about the Florida State Seminoles because they play Clemson in week 4, September 23rd, open with LSU. So they have a chance to really show people what kind of football team this is. And when Florida State won the national title in 2013. It was they played Clemson early, and they opened with Pitt that year, if you remember. Dominated Pitt, and then they played Clemson fairly early and dominated Clemson. So if this is a legit SEC or ACC, title team and a legit national title contender, you got to believe that this is likely. It's likely a 4-0 start. But, obviously they could lose one of those games, but I think a 4-0 start with the way with them moving in, when a team's moving in the right direction, you got to coach early in a program, and you have a year where Florida State's odds are up there for a national title, and they have high-end playmakers, people believing in them. You got to believe that, an early fast start and winning, your biggest games early is just going to propel you in the right direction and really truly get people believing in what you have brewing. But yeah, the ACC though, after that, their schedule seems to get a little bit easier. They have Miami at home November 11th. Miami should be improved at Florida November 25th. Miami and Florida obviously weren't great last year, but those are always games that you kind of highlight just because Miami can be competitive, is competitive with Florida State most years. Even Florida last year, Florida was right in it for most of the game, and that's always a game where, for the most part, you usually throw out the records. I know that's kind of a cliche in rivalry games, but Florida State, it seems like the team that's having the better season does win that game, but you can never count out the Florida Gators in that game, and Florida would say the same. You can never count out Florida State in that game. So my home versus Miami November 11th, at Florida November 5th, at Wake Forest October 28th. Wake Forest been a good team. They lose Sam Hartman at quarterback, but yeah, you can't count out Wake Forest. They're a tough team, and they could give Florida State some problems this year. But yeah, it's exciting how many people believe in the Florida State Seminoles. This is a program that college football is better when Florida State's good. You recognize their logo's iconic. Bobby Bowden, a legendary coach. Jimbo Fisher did some really nice things restoring the program. He was recruiting at a level that you hadn't really seen since Bobby Bowden. Mike Norvell, doing a good job bringing in top 15, top 20 classes, doing an excellent job in the transfer portal. They're going to have 2 new offensive linemen at guard. A new guard and tackle. Bring in a couple guys on defense that are projected to start. But yeah, I've just wished Kalen DeLoach, the linebacker, is a nice player. Akeem Dent at safety. I think they got a few guys that I kind of like. We'll see which highly touted freshman makes an impact. But yeah, the receiving core, they're going to put a lot of threat with Johnny Wilson, a guy who may not be 6'7", but he's at least 6'5", maybe 6'6", probably 6'5.5". And then Keon Coleman, 6'3", 6'4". Those guys are going to put a lot of pressure on defensive backs. And Jaheim Bell, not just a tight end. He's a guy that you can use out the backfield as like an H-back, running back. He's a guy that can block. I thought Bell was going to come out for last year's draft, so I evaluated him. He's a really good player. So, yeah, Florida State, weapons are all there. Jordan Travis at quarterback. Jordan Travis, to me, I feel like he just gets better and better. When I first watched him, I was like, this is a guy who, he's got some running ability, but I just thought, I thought he was pretty raw as a passer, and I was not ready to say he had some more room to grow. You could argue almost everyone does, but some guys, like I've touched on, some guys just are who they are at a certain point. But Jordan Travis, he seems to be more comfortable in this offense. He looks more confident, whether he's running read options, running the play action. Just he looks more in command of this offense, and he looks more confident when he's making throws. And his release looks quicker, and he throws the ball with more, with a little bit more drive and a little bit more push. So yeah, I like Jordan Travis. I think he's a good leader. I think he's good enough to win him a conference title. So that's just what I wanted to touch on with Florida State. It'd be interesting to see how they do this year. Telling test week 1 against LSU, and then week 4, or fourth game against Clemson, September 23rd. So we'll find out early about this Florida State Seminoles football team. Alrighty, so let's shift gears to USC. USC, it all starts at head coach Lincoln Riley, one of the best head coaches in college football. Lincoln Riley, an offensive genius. He's innovated. He's been proven to develop quarterbacks. USC got one of the better quarterbacks in the country, Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is such a dynamic thrower, can make plays on the run. He's projected to be the number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. What's interesting for USC this year? Well, how many of the transfers make a huge splash impact? You got Bear Alexander, a transfer from Georgia. He's got some size. He was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. He landed a transfer from Vanderbilt. Got a few other guys. So it could be a whole new defensive line. So we'll see if those guys make an impact. USC had to make an emphasis on building the trenches and getting more dominant on the defensive line. They had what was that one guy's name? They had a D tackle was really good. He got drafted, but USC over the last couple of years has had a few guys, but they have to have more of a presence on the defensive line. That's one thing that they really have to have. I think Caleb, as of right now, I'd say Caleb Bullock's the one true difference maker on the USC defense. Bullock, a versatile safety, can play the deep half, deep middle. He's an excellent tackler. He's tough, can make plays on the ball, whether that's coming down with tip passes or just coming down with clean interceptions. So Caleb Bullock, he's up there as one of the top safeties that'll be draft eligible next year. But yeah, USC, they've got some weapons. Dorian Singer, transfer from Arizona, a guy that did some nice things at Arizona. I think he adds a good dimension to the USC offense. A guy that can work the slot. He's got speed to come around and pick up yards on end arounds. Mario Williams is a really good receiver. He'll be in the mix, one of the top receivers 2024 NFL draft. You saw he was kind of the number 2 guy to Jordan Addison a little bit last year, but this is a guy I think that has some upside in his play. But USC, yeah, the Pac-12 is going to be tough. You got Utah, Oregon is on the rise with their new young coach. So yeah, I mean USC, they definitely have the ingredients to win a Pac-12 title. Caleb Williams, best odds to win the Heisman Trophy. But the question mark is could they afford to lose 2 games? Or even could they just afford to lose 1 game and win the conference title and still get in? I think it's a legitimate question for USC. But yeah, USC with a tough schedule and with Washington, Oregon, Utah, with a lot of teams super competitive. It's not going to be an easy road for the USC Trojans this year. So can USC? Can they win the Pac-12? Number 1, have they made enough improvement on the defensive side, on the defensive line and the offensive line to really do something special here? And does Caleb Williams continue to play at a high level? Now, Caleb, and what I mean by that is Caleb Williams, like obviously he's played really well the last 2 years. That's why he's in the running for the number 1 pick. But you've seen guys that go really high in the draft that maybe their third year they don't really have the best year and still get drafted, number 1 overall. Like remember, Jameis Winston, his last year at Florida State didn't really have the best year overall as compared to his first year starting, and he still got drafted with the first overall pick. Now Caleb Williams I think is a better player, but Caleb Williams could struggle with interceptions. Hopefully for USC's sake he's not banged up and or injured, but he could get a little banged up, and that could affect things. So there's things that could happen, and Caleb Williams can have his best year. Maybe USC does deal with some injuries, and some of the transfers don't pan out, and they lose. Maybe they do drop 4 or 5 games, and they aren't really in the mix at all as far as the conference title or the national title. It could happen, but. Yeah, USC, it seems like what I've seen for everywhere, USC is a popular pick to make the playoff in their or one of the teams that makes the playoffs for the first time this year. So, well, we'll see what happens. But yeah, USC, as far as they check a lot of boxes as far as ingredients that I talk about for making the college football playoff, really good head coach, elite quarterback play, weapons at the skill position, things trending in the right direction. Now the line of scrimmage, something I'm big on. That's a question mark, but I think this offensive line probably is good enough to win the conference title. I think do they have the pieces in place on the defensive line, and if so, can they play at a high level from start to finish? I think those are some of the key ingredients USC has, the case for why they could win a conference title, and then those are some the offensive line gelling together and their play at the line of scrimmage. That'll be the question that has to be answered. So let's talk Texas Longhorns. Texas, what's interesting, Quinn Ewers, their quarterback, is third in the Heisman odds. Steve Sarkisian, I was talking Texas a little bit earlier. Steve Sarkisian, a guy who just really, Sarkisian has had success. He's a guy that knows offense well. I thought he's done a nice job pretty much wherever he's been at developing quarterbacks, developing skill position players, and he's continued to do that at Texas, developing Quinn Ewers, Xavier Worthy, and then Bijan Robinson at running back. But the problem with Texas is they've struggled to really develop the offensive line and really get high-end play, get guys that are able to play at the next level on the offensive line. So yeah, Texas, even though Texas is going to be really good next year, and they have key playmakers returning like Jatavion Sanders, they have Quinn Ewers, Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy up there might be the second best receiver in the country. Even though they have key playmakers returning, I think, is that enough? Do they have enough, kind of like USC, do they have enough on the offensive line? And if so, can they be a good enough cohesive unit where you can really see their high-end playmakers shine like Worthy and Quinn Ewers? So that's the question mark with Texas. And then on the defense, where are the difference makers on the defense? They've lost some guys in the transfer portal. They have recruited fairly well. Can one of the young recruits they bring in be a difference maker on defense? I think getting Gary Patterson as an assistant coach defensively has made a difference for the Texas defense. But yeah, Texas, even though we know a lot, there's a lot of things we know for sure. There is a lot of question marks, certainly. So yeah, I mean, Texas, they're going to be good. Texas is going to win some games, but are they going to win enough games to get themselves in the mix of winning a conference title and making their first ever playoff appearance and getting back into a chance to win a national title for the first time since 2009? So, yeah. So let's talk Oklahoma. Oklahoma is one of my favorite teams to be turned around this year. I'm a big believer in Dillon Gabriel. I think Dillon Gabriel has some upside as a quarterback. Oklahoma, you really saw that this was a team that they struggled early in the year, but they really didn't lay down and die, and they continued to improve. You saw they had that nice upset win over Oklahoma State. So yeah, Oklahoma is really. I think this is a team that, I would not count them out at all. I think, even though they don't have as much talent defensively as they had in years past, I think offensively, and I think with Brett Venable, another year in Brett Venable's system, a defensive-minded coach, I think you will see Oklahoma improved. So, yeah, and I'm a fan of Javonte Barnes, the running back, just a true freshman this year. He's probably going to play a bigger role this year, so excited to see how he plays. So, yeah, Oklahoma is certainly a team that to really bounce back, and I forget what their win total was. I had talked about it before. I think it is like 9.5, and I think I might take the over. I think this is an Oklahoma team that, if there's one team that you could really see, 6 wins last year, if you could really see them, winning 3 or 4 more games this year, I think it's Oklahoma for sure. So let's talk Michigan Wolverines. So Michigan, the big question for Michigan, can they win 3 straight Big Ten titles? Can they beat Ohio State once again? I think, to me, I'm almost getting kind of spoiled as a Michigan fan. I've almost just kind of penciled that in, or not penciled it in, but I'm almost kind of like starting to expect that they're going to beat Ohio State. And I forget that once upon a time that game was just like, you just kind of dreaded looking for that week because Ohio State was most likely going to get a win. Now, as a Michigan fan, Michigan fans are always believers in their team, so a lot of times we were believing that Michigan had a chance. And some years, when Michigan was in that long losing streak, when Ohio State had won all those games from 2012 to 2019, there was several years where there was a couple years where Brady Hoke played it close. 2013, Ohio State. Or Michigan failed that 2-point conversion and they ended up losing by 1 point. The year after, 2014, they were competitive for a while, and then Ohio State kind of pulled away. Jim Harbaugh, 2016, they had that game with a controversial spot, and then Curtis Samuel scored the touchdown. So, yeah, once upon a time, it was almost kind of a lock that Ohio State was going to win. But now that's crazy how that shifted, and Michigan goes into this season expecting to win the Big Ten and expecting to probably, I don't know if I'd say expecting to beat Ohio State, but expecting to really be competitive and expecting that they, will have a chance to beat them again. Even though it is back in Ann Arbor, Ohio State is loaded with talent. You could argue that Ohio State has probably the most NFL talent of any team. So, yeah, Michigan, it's a weak non-conference schedule, so they should start 3-0 once again. They do have talent returning defensively. Mason Graham, or the defensive line, it's going to start with Mason Graham, Josiah Stewart, a transfer from Coastal Carolina, is a really good player. I think he offers a lot of upside as a pass rusher and as a run stopper. Linebacking core, Junior Colson, one of the best linebackers in all of college football. Where he gets, how he is viewed as for the NFL draft. I'm not as high on him for the NFL draft, but Junior Colson, a guy that's played a lot of football for Michigan, started as a true freshman in 2021, and I expect him to be a leader on the defense once again and be rock solid player and make a lot of tackles for him. Two safeties for Michigan, Makari Page, Rod Moore. Rod Moore, one of my favorite players in the Michigan defense. This guy just flies around, makes tackles. He's one of those guys that's a tone setter for Michigan. Do lose R.J. Moten. He transfers to Florida, but, R.J. Moten was kind of pushed out. He started to get less and less playing time. It started to become more and more Rod Moore and Makari Page really, really holding their own at the safety spots. At the corner positions, it's going to start Mike Sanders still as their proven leader. Nickelback, a guy that made a lot of plays for Michigan, former wide receiver, a guy that transitioned to cornerback really well. He's a super good athlete. Also got Will Johnson at corner. Will Johnson, excellent overall corner, just a young guy. You saw him really burst onto the scene last year. 2 interceptions against Purdue. So, yeah, Will Johnson offers a lot of upside. He's a tremendous athlete. He's got a chance to go down as one of the best corners Michigan's had. And I don't hold back when I say that. He's going to be right there. He'll be right up there when it's all said and done with some of the great corners that have played at Michigan, including Charles Woodson, Jordan Lewis, even great defensive back. Jabril Peppers. He's right. He'll be right in the mix when it's all said and done. Will Johnson coming out of high school, big time recruit out of the Grosse Pointe area in Michigan, and he's done an excellent job in his first season. And it's going to be locked in as a starter this year. Excuse me. They get Josh Wallace, a transfer from UMass. Saw a brief highlight on Wallace. It looks like he's got some size and length, a guy that can play man coverage. I think this is big because that's the one concern with the Michigan roster is they have high-end players. They have high-end talent in the secondary, Sanders Still and Will Johnson, as good at 2 corners anywhere in the country. Or as good of nickel and corner in the country as you'll find. But overall depth, Michigan is missing some depth at the cornerback position. So Josh Wallace, hopefully it's a guy that you can pencil in at that other starter, and hopefully he has a good season, stays healthy, and makes some plays for him because they really need him at that other corner, that other outside corner opposite of Will Johnson. So hopefully Josh Wallace can be that guy for Michigan. Yeah, the defensive line, Chris Jenkins back too. I always forget about Mason Graham. I like Mason Graham. He was a true freshman out of California that made a big impact for Michigan. Was a guy that got in the rotation year 1, but this is a guy that could be one of their key impact players inside on the defensive line. So really like what Mason Graham brings to the table. He's really good against the run. He's tough, strong, holds the point of attack. So. Really like Graham's game a lot. Got Jalen Harrell too. Chris Jenkins I touched on. The offensive line is going to be strong once again. Bringing Ladarius Henderson in the transfer portal. Mike Nugent, a center from Stanford. Miles Hinton too, the brother of Chris Hinton. Chris Hinton played at Michigan a couple years ago in 2021. So yeah, this offensive line. Best offensive line the last 2 years. Joe Moorhead award winner, and then they've done is just bring in guys that they needed for depth in the transfer portal. You got some guys too some other proven guys. Carson Barnhart, not a guy that really started most of the time, but a guy that's got experience. Giovanni El Hadi, he's a guy that's mostly been a backup, but when he's filled in, has done a really nice job. And then, receiver, Roman Wilson, been a nice player for him. Michigan, talent in place, J.J. McCarthy experience. I was talking with my dad. It's interesting. Michigan, this is one of it's like the first time Jim Harbaugh returns a starting quarterback at Michigan. It seems like, when they have gotten a guy that was playing well, whether it was Jake Rudock in his first year or, Jake Rudock in his first year always comes to mind. He was playing well, and then he left the next year because that was his last year. So it's cool to have Michigan establish his starting quarterback who's going to return next year. I guess you could say Cade McNamara 2021, but Cade McNamara, he was beat out by McCarthy so early in the year that you can't really count that. But yeah, McNamara now at Iowa. But Michigan. So experience at the skill position. Tight end. I really like the tight end unit. Colston Loveland. Colston Loveland really broke out. I mean, he had a spectacular year and really emerged at the end. You saw he made plays against Ohio State and TCU. A.J. Barner, transfer quarterback from Indiana, is a really good player. And then two of the best running backs in the country, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. Blake Corum with a case as the best running back in the entire country. So, yeah, Michigan, it's all there in place. It's not necessarily a given that they're just going to go 12-0, win the Big Ten, beat Ohio State. That's odds are even if you're a really good team, you're going to stumble somewhere along the way. You just hope for Michigan, if they do stumble somewhere along the way, it doesn't come back to bite them and cost them a chance to get back to Indianapolis. So hopefully Michigan back at Ohio State at home. They do have to go at Penn State. They do have to go at Michigan State. Michigan State kind of a game still. As much as I don't like to say it is a little bit of a throw out the record game, and just strange things tend to happen. Well, not all. Well, strange things tend to happen in that game, period. I was going to say in East Lansing, but strange things have just tended to happen in that game. I'm still nervous for it, even though Michigan won last year. You saw they collapsed in 2021, so, we'll see what happens there, but do have to go on the road at Michigan State and at Penn State.